Welcome, dear listeners, to The Haunting of Blackthorn Hall, a Tony and Sally mystery. Two young sleuths step into an abandoned castle where Halloween whispers hide a very human crime. If you enjoy classic mysteries, please subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. Pumpkins and Whispers. The countryside in October held a peculiar charm. Rolling fields, half shrouded in mist, spread away into the distance, their hedgerows dressed in autumnal reds and golds. The village of Brackensworth lay nestled in the hollow of a valley, its thatched roofs gathered like an old storybook illustration. Smoke curled from chimneys into the crisp air, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with the sweetness of fallen apples. For Tony Cartwright and Sally Middleton, both newly returned from their second year at college, it was the perfect retreat. The long journey from London had left them weary, but the sight of pumpkins on cottage doorsteps and paper lanterns swinging above cobbled lanes revived their spirits. The villagers were preparing for the Halloween festivities, and everywhere they turned there was a sense of busy excitement. "Your cousin Richard did choose the right weekend to invite us," Sally remarked, as the train drew away behind them, and the small hired trap carried them into the heart of the village. "It looks positively charming." Tony, a tall, broad-shouldered youth with a perpetually restless energy, grinned. "Richard always did enjoy theatrics. He claims Brackensworth throws the finest Halloween fair in the whole county. Ghost stories, bonfires, pumpkin feasts. You'll see for yourself tonight." Sally, neat and observant, her dark hair pinned beneath a travelling hat, raised an eyebrow. "And what about the castle? You didn't mention it in your letter until the very end." Tony shifted in his seat. "Ah, yes, Blackthorn Hall, at least what's left of it. The place has stood empty for decades, some say longer. The villagers whisper about hauntings, lights in the windows, that sort of nonsense, but it's really nothing more than ruins, I promise you." The driver of their trap, an old man with a weathered face, gave a sudden cough and snapped his reins. "Begging your pardon, sir," he said gruffly, "but it's best not to speak too lightly of the hall." Tony exchanged a glance with Sally. Curiosity immediately pricked. "Why not? Blackthorn Hall was cursed long before I was born. Folks say the last Baron was a cruel man, and that his restless spirit still walks the grounds. Strange lights have been seen, moaning heard from the ruins. Best keep to the village tonight, if you'll take an old man's advice." Sally leaned forward. "And has anyone ever gone inside to see what causes these disturbances?" The driver's eyes, pale blue beneath bushy brows, flickered to hers. "A few lads dared it once or twice, came back white as sheets, swearing they'd heard chains clanking in the dark. One fellow never did come back at all." Tony let out a short laugh, though it rang somewhat forced. "Superstitions. Every village has them. Don't let it unsettle you, Sally. Richard will have us occupied with merrier things." The trap drew up before a stone house on the edge of the village. Its ivy-draped walls glowed warmly in the setting sun, and in the doorway stood Richard himself. He was only a year older than Tony, but with his fair hair neatly brushed and his tweed jacket buttoned to the chin, he always seemed the more polished of the two. "Tony! Sally! Welcome to Brackensworth," he called, bounding down the steps. "I've taken rooms for you upstairs. We've quite a programme ahead. There's to be a fair on the green, games for the children, and tonight a lantern procession. But first you must come in and warm yourselves." Inside, the house smelled of spiced cider and fresh bread. Richard's aunt, a kindly widow with a round face, fussed over them and pressed steaming cups into their hands. The three cousins, though Sally was family only by affection, settled before the fire. Conversation turned inevitably to the castle. "Blackthorn Hall," Richard echoed when Tony mentioned the driver's warnings. His eyes gleamed with amusement. "Oh, you'll hear plenty about it before the night is over. The villagers thrive on their tales. Haunted halls, phantom barons, glowing windows. It keeps the children in check and gives the grown-ups something to mutter about by the hearth." "But you don't believe it?" Sally asked. Richard laughed outright. "Of course not. I've been up to the hall myself on more than one occasion. It's nothing but stones and ivy. A draught through a broken window can make a most unearthly sound, I'll grant you, but there's nothing supernatural in it." Sally's gaze lingered on him thoughtfully. "Then why do you look so very pleased with yourself when you speak of it?" Richard smiled slyly. "Because I've arranged a little expedition. After the procession tonight, we three shall go and see Blackthorn Hall by moonlight. Then you'll know there are no such things as ghosts." Tony groaned. "Sally will think we're quite mad." "On the contrary," she replied coolly, "I think it's the only sensible thing to do. If we mean to enjoy our stay here, we ought to put these rumours to rest." The matter seemed settled, though the shadows lengthening at the window gave a chill reminder that evening was closing in. Later, when the village green came alive with stalls, lanterns, and fiddlers, the three friends threw themselves into the merriment. Children darted between the booths in masks and capes, apples bobbed in barrels, and the air was thick with laughter and the smell of roasted chestnuts. Yet even in the gaiety, whispers of the hall persisted. At one stall, an old woman selling sugared nuts peered at the trio and wagged a crooked finger. "Keep away from the castle," she warned. "All Hallows Eve is when spirits are strongest. Best not to anger them." Richard thanked her politely and moved them along. By the time the lantern procession wound its way through the lanes, hundreds of flickering lights bobbing in the darkness, the moon had risen. Richard's plan lay ahead, waiting at the edge of the village. Beyond the hedgerows, the dark mass of Blackthorn Hall loomed faintly against the night sky, its towers broken, its windows hollow. Sally shivered, though whether from the autumn cold or from the sight itself, she could not tell. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The villagers' laughter and music faded behind them, replaced by the rustle of dry leaves. Chapter 2. Ghost Stories at the Inn. The village inn, the Red Hart, was old enough to have forgotten who first laid its beams. A few latecomers from the fair drifted in, bringing with them a scatter of straw and the last scents of smoke and cider from the green. Beyond the small-paned windows, the October night pressed close. The lanterns from the procession bobbed away toward the churchyard, their lights dwindling one by one. Richard ushered Tony and Sally to a table in the corner. The innkeeper's wife, a spare, capable woman in a dark dress and apron, set down 3 bowls of soup and a round of bread without ceremony. "You'll be wanting hot food before you tramp about the lanes," she said, with a glance that took in their coats and sensible shoes. "No moon worth the name tonight. The mist comes up from the river after 9. "From the river?" Sally asked as she pulled off her gloves. "I hadn't realised there was one so near." "A bend of it, miss, no more," the woman replied, tucking a loose wisp of hair back beneath her cap. "Turns behind the alder copse and runs on past the old mill. It's nothing you'd see from the green. The hall stands between what's left of it. The water keeps its secrets in weather like this." She paused, then added, as if against her better judgment, "Best keep to the roads." When she was gone, Richard leaned in. "You observe how no one speaks of the hall without an extra word for the darkness and the mist? It's part of the tale. Ghosts thrive on fog, so they say. It's not the air that troubles me. It's the people who love to be troubled by it," Tony said. At a nearby table 3 men had gathered with their ale, 2 farmhands by their boots and hands, and an older fellow in a frayed coat. Their voices were pitched low at first, but the cadence of a practised story draws its own audience. Before long, the words crept through the common room, and snatches of conversation floated to the ears of the 3 friends. "Saw it with my own eyes," the eldest said, with a nod that dared contradiction. "A light in the upper window where none should be. A blue light, like a lantern seen through water, and the sound, Lord save us, the sound of chains, slow and dragging, from the courtyard." The younger man shook his head. "You were in your cups, Abel. Old stories and young cider make strange company." "Then why is it," Abel demanded, "that I found marks in the mud next morning?" "Wheels? not cart wheels from the farm, narrower, and prints that aren't no villagers' shoes. Narrow wheels, the second man repeated, half to himself. Sally caught Tony's eye, and then looked down. When she glanced up, Richard was smiling faintly. "We're not the only ones who take an interest," he murmured. The inn's door opened then, with a cool draught, and a few heads turned. A man entered, set his hat carefully on the peg, and stood to warm his hands at the hearth before moving farther in. He was of middle height, solidly built, with a lined, watchful face and a dark coat. The innkeeper straightened a little as he approached the bar. "Inspector Harrington," the innkeeper said. "Your usual?" "For a short while only." The newcomer's voice was even, with a hint of weariness beneath it. His gaze, while casual, missed very little. It drifted over the room, alighted a second on the three friends, and moved on without fuss. When the tankard was set down, he lifted it but did not immediately drink. "Busy night," he observed, to no one in particular. "There's always talk on a busy night." Abel, who had been readying himself for another flourish, hesitated. The presence of the Lord dims even the best lights of imagination. Still, when the inspector made no move to interrupt, the old man's story resumed, though chastened in its extravagance. Sally waited until Abel's voice had dropped again, and then leaned across their table. "Richard, you said you'd been up to the hall," she began softly. "Did you notice anything out of place?" "Not in the ruins themselves, but around them. Tracks, perhaps." "Only the tracks we made," Richard replied, "though I admit I didn't pay attention to the ground, as one might during a dry summer. The autumn earth keeps a firmer memory." "Narrow wheels," Tony repeated, recalling the phrase. "What uses narrow wheels?" "Not a farm cart, perhaps a barrow, or a hand cart. The old mill might have had tracks for moving sacks." Richard shook his head. "The mill's been shut for years. The roof fell in on the south side last winter. No one hauls anything there now." "It may not be the mill," Sally said. "Older copse, river bend, ruined hall between. If someone wished to keep folk away from a path to the river, what better than a tale of a haunting? Even the bold prefer lighted roads to wet lanes at night. A lull fell as they ate. The soup was plain but sustaining, the bread good and close-grained. When their bowls were cleared, the innkeeper's wife returned with a plate of cheese and a pot of mustard. "You'll forgive an old woman her curiosity," she said, not unkindly. "You're from London, that's clear. Visiting Mr. Richard?" "We are," Sally answered. "We've come for the festivities." "And after," the woman ventured, "you'll go home with a good story of village ghosts, I suppose." "Only if we find one," Tony said. "More likely we'll find broken staircases and a draught." The woman's look sharpened. "You'll leave that place alone, then?" "The land about it's not safe. Holes where there used to be cellars, walls ready to come, and worse besides. We've had strangers about these weeks past, men who keep to the edges and ask the wrong sort of questions." "What sort?" Tony asked. "About boats," she said. "About the water level after a rain. About which cottages are empty, and who sleeps with a lamp in the window. Not the questions of a ghost hunter." She caught herself and glanced over her shoulder, as if regretting the candour. "I've said too much. You'll excuse me." She moved away before they could press her. Richard exhaled slowly. "There now," he said. "You hear it from more than one mouth." Not all superstitions are of the past. Inspector Harrington had taken a place at the far end of the bar, where he conversed quietly with the innkeeper. At length he set down his tankard, nodded, and turned toward the door. As he passed their table he slowed, whether from intent or accident was hard to say. "You're Mr. Cartwright," he said to Richard, in that same even tone, "from the house at the lane's end. We've had a word or two with your aunt about the procession. All in good order, I trust?" "Quite, Inspector," Richard replied, rising a fraction in his chair in an instinctive show of respect. "This is my cousin Tony, and Miss Sally Middleton." Harrington inclined his head politely. "Miss Gentleman." His eyes rested on each of them in turn. "Best keep to the lit ways tonight. The footpaths are narrows and the banks slick. "I've no wish to pull anyone from the river in the morning." "We had thought to look at the hall," Tony ventured, "only to see what all the talk concerns." "A great many have thought so," Harrington answered, without emphasis. "The hall will still be there tomorrow. The dark only lends colour to tales that don't merit it." He paused as if weighing whether to add more, then said, "If you must satisfy your curiosity, do it by daylight. And if you see strangers abroad who keep their hats down and their talk smaller than their movements, you'll let me know." "We will," Richard said. The inspector's gaze shifted, just a fraction, toward the three men at the neighbouring table. Abel had fallen silent while Harrington stood. Now, under the inspector's glance, he busied himself with his cup as if it required attention. Harrington's mouth set the smallest degree, neither smile nor frown. He touched the brim of his hat, took it from the peg, and went out into the foggy night. When the door closed behind him, the common room exhaled. Conversation rose again, with the clink of mugs. "You see," Richard said lightly, though his eyes had taken on the thoughtful sheen she knew well. "Even the inspector speaks like a parson. Keep to the light, trust daylight. I suppose he's not wrong." Tony leaned forward. "He said strangers." "The innkeeper's wife said men with questions. The old fellow speaks of narrow wheels and odd prints. All of it runs one way, not toward ghosts." "Toward use," Sally said. "Toward someone using the hall and the land about it for ends they would rather veil. If there is a path to the river through the ground, and if there are goods to be moved quietly, the ruin would serve well, provided the village can be made to fear it." Richard's fingers tapped a slow rhythm on the table's edge. "You think like a magistrate, Sally." "I think like any person who prefers facts to rumours," she answered. "And I think," she added after a moment, "that if we are to see the hall, we must do so with our eyes on the ground as much as on the walls." They paid their reckoning and stepped out, then set off toward Richard's aunt's house to fetch heavier coats and a second lantern. The lane curved and dipped past hedges, and a stone trough where water shivered under a slight current. As they walked, Sally noticed a faint, tarry smell that did not belong to wet earth or wood smoke. It lingered and then thinned with the breeze. She slowed, turned her head, and saw nothing but the pale ghost of their own breath. "Do you smell that?" she asked. Tony drew in the air and nodded. "Pitch or oil? From where?" "There will be boats on the river," Richard said, "even in a quiet bend. They tar the seams ahead of winter." "Do they tar them at night?" Sally asked. Richard did not answer. He did not need to. The question hung between them with the thin, persistent scent. At the gate of the house, they found a second lantern, already trimmed and set by the door. Richard's aunt had gone to bed. Her soft tread and the creak of boards above announced the end of her day. In the corridor, Sally took up a woolen scarf and wound it close at the throat. Tony checked the lanterns, tested the caps, and filled one fresh from the oil tin. They were ready. Richard lifted the latch and they stepped out again. The lane ahead led away between hedges and out toward the wasting line of the hall, and beyond that, by rumour and by smell, toward water. "Straight to the gates," Richard said in a low voice. "No wandering. If the ground is poor, we turn back." Sally nodded. The lanterns cast circles on the road as they began to walk. They went on, listening, and once Sally thought she heard, far off and brief, the dull, deliberate clink of iron on stone. She could not tell if it came from the direction of the hall or from the river beyond. No one spoke. The lane bent, the hedgerow fell away, and the land opened onto the dark, broken silhouette of Blackthorn Hall. The gate, once grand, stood crooked in its posts, half shut as if to hold the night in. Tony raised his lantern. The light spilled over the latch, over the scored wood, and down to the earth, where the mud lay smoother than the lane, and yet marked with lines that ran parallel and close, as if a pair of narrow wheels had passed not long before. Sally drew a breath. "There," she said, "let us remember where we begin." They stepped through the gate into the shadow of the hall. Chapter 3. A Cousin. Vanishes. The gate swung inward with a groan and settled against its hinge with a sound that was too loud for the hush that lay over the place. Beyond, the courtyard of Blackthorn Hall opened like a basin scooped from shadow. The ground was broken flag, half sunk and half proud, with grass threading the gaps and puddles holding a wan reflection of the sky. What had been the great house rose in jagged outlines, a roofless range to the left, where joists stood like ribs, a squat tower to the right, with one high window squared against the night, and straight ahead the shattered arch of a once grand doorway that now gave onto the dark of the great hall. Tony lifted his lantern. Close by the gate, the smooth earth showed the same narrow parallel lines they had noticed from the lane, now more deeply pressed and turning along the courtyard's edge toward the broken arch. Beside them lay boot prints, not one set but many, crossing and half obscuring each other. Some were crisp at the heel and blurred at the toe. Sally knelt without speaking and set the lantern on a flat stone. She ran a gloved finger along the wheel mark and found the ridge damp and fresh. A faint smear came away, half mud, half something darker. When she raised her hand to the light, a shine lay along the curve of her glove. "Oil," she said quietly. Tony pointed to a scrap that had caught at a tuft of grass. He freed it and brought it near the lantern. It was a strand of coarse grey sacking, stiff at the edge with tar. Richard had gone a few paces ahead. "There is nothing supernatural about trade," he said, his voice low. "If men are in the habit of coming and going, we need only find where." They followed the marks round the courtyard's curve to the remains of a postern door sunk below the flag. Here the stones sloped down to a low arch hung with ivy and nettle, half hidden in the shadow of the tower. The narrow lines ran straight to it and vanished at the threshold. The door itself was present, in substance only, a heavy slab long since fallen from its hinges and leaning against the inner wall. Beyond it lay a short passage and then a turn to the right, where darkness began again. "Cellars," Tony said, "or the old service way." A faint sound came then, so slight that they might have imagined it if all three had not heard the same thing at once. The dull metallic clink of iron on stone, deliberate and unhurried. Richard's face, when he glanced back at them, showed no fear, only a sharpened alertness. "There is someone below," he whispered. "It would explain the light they say is seen from the tower. If they keep watch, they will have a signal." He turned to the right-hand wall, where the tower's base rooted to the earth. The masonry here was less ruined than elsewhere. A narrow stair turret, circular and blind on three sides, rose with its stones half intact. "If the tower still has its steps, they will be along this line," he said under his breath. His hand ran lightly over the stone. "There was a door here once. The oak is gone, but the jambs remain." Sally brought her lantern close. The cut of chisel work showed under centuries of weather, and in the midst of ivy's fine grip there was clear space where recent fingers had brushed. She slipped her hand in and found level with her knee a ring of cold iron. Tony took the ring, eased it, and a small panel of weathered planks moved inward on hidden hinges. In the dark beyond ran a close stair, its steps narrow and winding. "We must not blunder," Sally said. "We need a way back and the knowledge to show where we have been." She drew a pale chalk from her coat pocket and marked a small cross on the stone beside the panel, then another on the third step down. They went in one at a time, Tony first with the lantern, Richard behind him, Sally last. The stair turned upon itself and ended at a slit of a landing and a second door. This one, a simple board held by a bar. A thin line of light edged the wood. Tony pressed his ear to it and heard the murmur of voices, flattened by the plank, and a soft scraping, as of something drawn over stone. Richard put a hand to Tony's sleeve. "I will see first," he said. "I can move quietly, and if there is danger, it is better that one must retreat than three to jam the way." Sally shook her head, but he was already easing the bar up, placing it gently against the jamb so it would not fall, and drawing the door until there was a slit no wider than a hand. Light touched his cheek and vanished as he slipped through. The door came level again, and in the hush that followed, the sound of their breathing grew louder. Tony counted in his mind. He reached 50, then 100, then 150. The voices beyond rose a tone and fell. The metallic clink came once more, farther this time. He leaned to the crack and saw only a slice of a room and the edge of a crate with a stencil mark. The letters could not be fully read, but there was a crown shape and a number. He drew back and looked at Sally. She pointed to the bar, then to the door, then mimed opening. Tony shook his head. Not yet, but Richard did not return. Richard, Tony breathed, very low at the wood. Sally leaned in, listened, then set her palm to the door and pushed a fraction. It moved with an ease. She pushed again and found no resistance. The slit widened upon a room that had once been a storage vault. The vault of a great house where hams might hang and bins hold grain. Now it bore the untidy order of men who came often and left quickly. There were crates which stood in pairs, narrow-wheeled barrows, and on a table there was a lamp with a blue glass shade that threw its colour into the corners. The air was sour with oil and river damp. Richard was nowhere to be found. They stepped in together. Tony crossed to the table and laid his hand just above the lamp. The metal was warm. On the floor near the inner arch his boot caught and skidded slightly. He bent, lifted a tiny shape from the flags, and found a silver shirt stud with a smooth pearl-like top. He rubbed it clean at his cuff and saw on its shaft a scratch he knew. Richard had a pair with a flaw on one. Sally came quickly to his side. He set the stud on his palm, and she closed her fingers over it, and then opened them again, as if weighing truth. She turned where the floor bore marks, a confusion of prints, some pressed deep, one set that dragged at the heel. Beside those a faint scuff marked the flags in a leftward arc, and the arc ended in a dark smear on the rough of the wall at forearm height. There was a struggle, she said, brief and close, not a flight. Her voice was steady. They took him at once. Tony moved to the arch that led on from the vault. It opened upon a passage that turned sharply and then sloped down. He went 3 steps and stopped. Ahead in the half-light, the way was barred by an iron grille set into a stone frame. The padlock that held it was new. Beyond the bars, the passage continued a little way and then bent, and from that bend there came the faintest echo of water. Sally was at his shoulder. She lifted the lantern, and the light slid along the iron to the lock and found the scratch of a recent key. She lowered the lantern and looked back toward the room. They knew the stair. They saw our light, or his. They had the lock and the path. Tony tightened his jaw. "We cannot follow without a key," he said, "and if we call, we tell them we are here." Sally nodded. "Then we must do the one thing of use. We must bring the inspector while we still have warmth in the lamp and damp in the tracks." They closed the door carefully, set the bar back in its socket without noise, and climbed the stair. At the small panel in the outer wall, Sally paused and made a second white cross beside the first. As they stepped into the open, a sound reached them through the veil, a soft splash, then another. Tony raised his head. From the direction of the river beyond the alder copse there came the faint creak of oarlocks. They crossed the yard at a run and came to the gate. Here, on the soft strip where earth had collected against the post, the narrow wheel lines took up again and ran away leftward toward a break in the hedge where once a path had led to gardens. Now it led down over rough ground toward the dark suggestion of the copse. "Richard is not in the house," Tony said, though they both knew it. "They have taken him along the path to the water." Sally looked back once at the high blank window of the tower. The blue light did not show now. The ruined arch did not hint at men and rooms below. All looked as it had when they came, a carcass of stone and shadow. "They have outpaced us for the moment," she said. "We will not give them the hours that a night affords." They closed the gate and set off at a pace for the lane, and went straight to the Red Hart. The inn was quieter than before, but not asleep. 2 men at a corner table were bent low over dominoes. When Tony and Sally came in together, with wet at their cuffs and a look in their eyes that was not of festival, the innkeeper set down the glass he had been wiping and turned toward the passage that led to the back. "Inspector," he called, "you are wanted." Harrington was there before the word had finished. His hat was on his head and his coat about his shoulders. His glance took them in, weighed and did not waste time. "What have you seen?" he asked. Tony told him in few words. The courtyard, the marks, the stair in the wall, the vault with the lamp and the crates, the stud, the locked grille, the oars on the river. Sally set the stud upon the bar. Harrington's eyes rested on it, then on the oil at the edge of Sally's glove, and then on the small pale cross of chalk that lay like dust along her thumb. "You marked the way," he said. "I did," she answered. "Twice." He nodded. "Tom," he said over his shoulder, and the innkeeper's son, a broad lad with good legs, appeared from the back. "Rouse Evans and Briggs. Lanterns, staves, and the bolt cutters from the shed. Tell Mrs. Wakes to keep the road lamps lit. If anyone asks, the inspector wants the paths clear for the return of the last children. Say nothing else." Tom was gone before the last words left the man's mouth. Harrington stepped to the door and looked out into the lane, gauging fog and sound, then back at the Tony and Sally. "You will come as far as the gate and tell me where your marks begin," he said. "After that you will stand aside. You have done what you should, and more would be foolish." They went out together, their lanterns careful to throw light ahead. At the gate of Blackthorn Hall, Sally reached for the latch. She pushed, and the gate gave way. "Here," she said softly, and pointed to the ground where her chalk lay on the stone at knee height. Harrington bent, saw it, and the line of his mouth firmed. "Very good," he said. He lifted his hand, and the constables, Evans and Briggs, arriving at a trot with Tom and two more men, halted without clatter. "No one speaks unless there is cause. No one runs unless I run. You two," he added to Tony and Sally, "wait at the arch, not beyond. If you hear me call, you go back to the lane and fetch the doctor." He looked once at the ruined tower, once toward the alder copse where the river lay hidden, and then set his hand to the small panel in the wall. The iron ring turned. The door moved inward. Harrington lifted his lantern and went down into the stairs turn, and the others followed. Tony and Sally stood where he had said, at the edge where courtyard became passage, where open air gave way to stone. They listened to the careful footfalls on the steps, the slide of leather on old treads, and then the quiet that holds when men stop and look in the same direction. Sally held her lantern low and steady. On the stone beside her boot the second chalk cross was white and exact. She thought of Richard's stud on the bar, of the lamp with blue glass, of the careful clink of iron on stone. She drew one slow breath and fixed in her mind the path from the gate to the stair, from the stair to the vault, from the vault to the bars beyond. Somewhere beyond those bars the river turned its patient curve, and beyond the curve men worked in darkness, who had borrowed a village's fear for cover. "Hold steady," she said. Tony did not answer. He did not need to. Chapter 4. Lanterns in the Ruins. From the stair-mouth the sounds came up in fragments, a quiet order given. The scrape of a soul-finding purchase, a short metallic clink as the bolt cutters changed hands. Inspector Harrington's men did not waste noise. Evans went first with the lantern, Briggs close behind with the cutters slung from his shoulder. Harrington took the blue-shaded lamp from the table in the vault, shielded its light with his palm, and glanced once at the stencils on the nearest crate. He touched the lettering without comment. The mark was a crude crown, the word beneath shaved back to a scar of wood. Someone had rasped away an excise seal. "Hold your light," he said, and Briggs set the cutters to the padlock on the iron grille that barred the passage beyond. Metal fell into the inspector's hand with the smallest thud. He passed the broken shackle to Evans without looking and shouldered the gate. The passage ran a short stretch, bent left, and began to slope. Farther down the echo of moving water answered their own breath. Harrington kept to the middle, where feet had worn a smooth line. He lifted the lamp once and found on the right-hand wall a ring set chest-high into the stone. A new hemp rope had polished a bright groove there. "Landing below," he said. "Evans, mind your footing." Back in the vault, Tony and Sally read the room with a quickness sharpened by worry and by the inspector's unspoken example. The barrows that crouched along the wall bore the same narrow iron wheels that had printed the courtyard mud. The table with the blue lamp held also a stub of candle cut flat with a knife and a box of matches wrapped in oiled paper. Behind the crates lay folded sacks of coarse grey, tar stiff at the seams, and near them a coil of rope, new like the one at the ring. On the flags, one clear heel mark dragged a half circle toward the passage mouth and ended in a smear where a forearm had met the wall. Sally pointed to the smear and to the place where a sleeve had left the faintest thread caught on a nail-head. Tony brought it to the light. It was the right colour to have come from Richard's tweed. He put it into his pocket. The sound of oarlocks drifted once more up the passage, closer now in memory than in fact. Then Harrington's voice floated up, low but firm. 2 steps more. There is a sill. The words echoed, thinned, and were gone. Briggs returned first, his face lifted to the lantern glow. A door onto the water, sir, he said when he reached them, catching his breath. Stone-cut steps to a sallyport, good enough for one man with a load. There's a ring set low and the slime fresh about it. Boat has gone out within the half hour. Harrington came on his shoulder. A faint damp shone along his sleeve. They use the tide, he said. Easy down river under cover of fog. If they have a place to put in, it will be out of sight of the mill lane and far from cottages. And Richard, Tony said. Harrington looked at him a moment. Was moved quickly, he answered. If he fought, he did not fight long. Men who practice this craft do not linger with their burdens. He set the blue shade over the lamp again and covered it with his hand. In the ghostly glow, the vault took on the very look of the village stories. A poor stage trick and a good one, he said. Seen through ruin, this would frighten wide eyes at 50 paces. He turned the shade in his fingers, noted a chip on the rim, and slipped the glass into his coat pocket. Briggs, Evans, secure this room. Tom, back to the inn, and send word to Constable Pritchard to take 2 men and watch the bend below the alder copse. No lanterns on the bank. If they see anything that floats and creeps, they are to keep it in sight and not be heroes. Tom vanished into the passage. Evans and Briggs began to work in that methodical quiet that tells of practice. One dragged the barrows tight against the wall and turned their wheels inward. The other stacked the sacks in a neat pile beneath the table and shifted the crates so that the stencilled sides faced outward. Harrington eyed every change. "Miss Middleton," he said without looking up, "you have a good eye. Tell me what you do not see." Sally let the question stand in the air a moment. "I do not see food," she said. "I do not see bedding. I do not see the careless leavings of men who make a place their own. Whoever uses this room comes to shift goods, not to live here. The things that make the haunting are portable or kept above." "Above," Harrington repeated. He lifted the lamp and cast its light along the stone on the far side. A seam ran there, old but cleaner than the wall about it, as if ivy had been brushed away. He pressed and a panel yielded. Beyond, a narrow stair corkscrewed upward within the tower's thickness. "We will humour the ghosts," he said. "Evans with me. Mr. Cartwright, Miss Middleton, stay exactly where you are until I call. If anyone but my voice opens this door, you shout." They heard the inspector's feet on the stair. A short while later, his voice came down again. One level, slit window, the wind uses it, another flight. The next call was farther and absorbed by the tower. When he returned, he set the lamp down, and from his free hand laid his findings on the table one by one. A length of chain greased and tied to a peg, so that a tug sent it dragging along the inner face of the wall. A canvas screen, pale and scored with chalk, mounted on a light frame, that could be set before the slit window and lit from behind to make a waver of form. A child's whistle, drilled to a thin keening that, blown near stone, sounded like breath. A bottle that had once held phosphorus solution, the dregs gone to a scum on the glass. They liked their theatre, he said. With a blue lamp in a high slit and a chain to sing against the stone, a mind prepared by a story does the rest. He touched the canvas with the back of a finger. They have been careful to leave nothing that names them. No coat, no cap, no initials. Did you see where they signalled from? Tony asked. A small stand set in the sill, Harrington said. Marks of a lamp foot in the dust. The blue shade gives a colour that does not carry far. A boatman looking up would know it from a cottage lamp. Sally had been studying the crates while they spoke. The rasped excise mark had left splinters feathered along the grain. She passed her finger along one and felt how recently the knife had worked. On another crate, near the lower edge, she found a chalk sign, a simple triangle with a stroke through it. It could have been a careless mark from loading, yet it was drawn with a deliberate hand. She showed it to Harrington. He considered and shook his head. A tally. Not local. Keep away from putting more meaning into it, then it will hold. He looked once more at the broken lock on the floor, then at the passage down to the water. We will not chase a boat in fog, he said. They know this bend and the cut into reed beds better than anyone. We will work the ground instead. Evans, take Briggs and 2 men to the path by the alder copse. No light. Keep your distance from the water. If you see a second run tonight, let it pass and tell me when it's gone. If you hear a single whistle from the bank, you answer with nothing at all and wait. Evans nodded and shouldered his lantern with the hood down. Briggs lifted the cutters again and slipped them back over his shoulder by habit. Harrington turned to Tony and Sally. You will come up, he said. See what is worth remembering above, then go back to the house. I may want your eyes again at dawn, and I will want them clear. They climbed to the tower room. Harrington showed them how the small stand had been wedged into the sill, its feet cutting crescent marks into the stone. A narrow shelf held a hard roll of cloth that, unfurled, would make a hanging to take light and mimic a wavering form. The chain peg, newly driven, stood at shoulder height. A tug on the free link sent a dragging groan along the wall, uncanny even when one knew its cause. Sally looked down through the slit. Beyond the outer wall, she could see the fainter dark of the alder copse, and beyond that, nothing at all. How far does the blue carry? She asked. Far enough to be known by one who looks up for it, Harrington said. Not far enough to alarm a cottage. It is well chosen. I shall borrow it. He tapped his coat where the shade lay. If a lamp shows again tonight from the hall, in the colour they expect, I mean it to be held by a hand of the law. They went down together. In the vault, Harrington put the furniture of haunting back into its place, not to deceive the innocent, but to be sure he did not teach the guilty that he had read their book. Harrington closed the gate and set Briggs's broken lock in his pocket. At the lane he set 2 men on the hedge's bend and told them to keep their ears on the ground. Your aunt will worry if you do not show her face, he said to the 2. Tell her what must be told and that you will be kept safe. In the morning I will have questions ready, and I shall want your answers exact as pins. They did as they were told. At the house, the aunt met them at the stair, with a shawl clutched to her chest. Sally told her what could be said. Time passed slowly. The clock on the landing struck 11. Tony turned from the window at last and said the words out loud that had sat between them like a third person. They will not kill him for nothing. No, Sally said. They took him because he saw or because he is of use. While he is useful, he is safe. The words were not comfort, but they were true, and truth helps the mind stand still. Midnight found them still at the window, lantern low, listening to the night. Then, as the last stroke fell away, a faint pulse of light touched the rim of the hall's broken roof. It came and went, a small wash on stone. Tony stiffened. Did you see that? Sally had. The glow was not the yellow of a house lamp. Blue, she said, from the tower. They looked at each other, then toward the lane. After a breath came the soft padding of feet and the quick, controlled tap at the door. When Tony opened, Constable Evans. The inspector asks that you keep your lamps shaded and your eyes open, he said. He will answer the hall himself. You will remain here and do nothing brave. He was gone before Tony could answer. The door closed. The blue pulse touched the ruin a second time and was gone again. Sally let the curtain fall to a hand's width and sat. He is calling them, she said, or answering them. Either way, the play will move. Chapter 5. The Mask Behind the Haunting. From the tower slit, Harrington raised the lamp with the blue shade and showed one measured pulse. The river answered with the soft rub of wood on stone. Below, 3 men moved in routine. Boat to Sally Port, crate to barrow, barrow to vault. No talk, no hesitation. Harrington counted heads and habits. Scarfed youth carrying left, right foot turned out. Cap-billed man breathing through the mouth. Boatman with a creaking oar collar. 4 crates came up. The barrow's narrow iron rims cut clean twin ruts, matching the tracks Tony and Sally had seen. "They'll repeat," Harrington said. "We learn the route." He left the vault as it was, slipped through the postern, and followed the wheel marks along the garden path to low ground. At the alder edge the ruts deepened, turned, and led inland. Tar smudged a thorn. The bank showed rope drag at the iron mooring ring. The cart met the barrows, 100 paces from the lane. A horse with a white star, and a man at its head, took the load without lamps. A watcher kept to the hedge, and did not lift. Harrington let the team pass and shadowed it to Pike's Yard. Gate half ajar, tarpaulin up. A door scraped at the shed's far side. Voices stayed low. A second light cart rolled out soon after. 2 empty barrows stacked, tailboard chalked with a neat triangle, struck through. It took the Wexley road. "Pattern noted," Harrington said, and returned to the hall. At dawn he brought Tony and Sally to see it plain. The vault held barrows, tarred sacks, scraped excise crowns on crates, rope, and the blue-shaded lamp. Down the opened grille, the Sally Port stone steps were slimed and freshly scored. "Warehouse under a ghost story," Harrington said. "Boat to vault, barrow to meadow, cart to yard. You don't need many men if fear keeps the footpath empty." "Richard?" Tony asked. "Moved by land," Harrington answered. "They won't risk a captive on water if they sense we're listening." "Country ice pits make convenient rooms. We'll work toward them tonight." He set the day's tasks. Evans to the Church Louvre for a top view of Pike's Gate and the Wexley Turn. Pritchard and Hall to the Alder Bend. No lamps, only ears. Briggs to the Lower Meadow Hedge. 2 borrowed men at the lane to close a cart's escape. Tom to carry messages and keep the Red Hart's front harmless. They walked to the smithy. Hobb showed a rack of narrow iron rims. "Order last week," he said. "Tight as a knife. Carrier's lad paid, he tapped a barely visible notch at the weld. My mark." "Useful if we need to match wheels to work," Harrington said. At Pike's Yard, Harrington stood in the gateway long enough to be recognised. "Expecting apples?" "Always apples," Pike said, hat low. "If you fetch bins, we'll see them," Harrington replied, and left him to stew under ordinary words. Back in the village square, Sally pointed out a passing barrow with the same chalk sign the vault crate had shown. Triangle with a stroke, drawn clean, not casual. "I saw it last night by the churchyard too," she said. "Same hand." "A tally," Harrington said. "Not a sailor's, likely a field mark from an orchard that counts in bins." "Baines's?" Tony asked. The orchard owner's chalk marks were on half the village's autumn crates. "Possibly," Harrington said. "Names later. First the chain." He gathered the team in the Red Hart's back room and cut the plan to essentials. "They'll try 2 runs behind the fair, early and late. I'll answer the tower signal with their colour, so the boat comes in. First run we observe end to end. If the cart goes to Pike's, note heads, gate and timings. No arrests yet. Knowledge buys the second run. On the late run we close at the meadow, and again at the yard. If they split to the quarry pits, we meet them there. Assignments short and specific. Evans, Louvre slit, tally cards passed by runner. Pritchard and Hall. Reeds at the bend, count oars, no challenges. Briggs. Hedge at Lower Meadow, watch the watcher. 2 borrowed men, lane closure on signal. Tom. Lamps at the inn, messages, no gossip. Tony and Sally. Church with Mr. Elliot. You count. That's your whole job. He walked Tony and Sally through the map aloud. Vault, grill, Sally Port, meadow, hedge gap, lane, Pike's Gate, Wexley Turn, until they could repeat it cleanly. By late afternoon, stalls were up, lantern cords hung, and the square began to fill. From the Louvre, Evans showed sightlines, Pike's Gate in profile, the road to Wexley, the mill lane, and the churchyard yews where men could pass unnoticed. He pressed a pencil and card into Sally's hand. Write only what we need, number of men, direction, time. Near dusk, a barrow rolled quietly past the churchyard. The tailboard bore the chalk triangle stroke. 2 men, collar-high headman, and a rearman favouring his right ankle. Sally wrote it short. A runner took the card down the stair. At the hall, Harrington set the blue shade in the slit and gave one narrow wash of colour. Below, the boat scraped in again. The men ran the drill, crate, barrow, vault. Harrington let it finish, replaced the cut shackle in the grill as if untouched, and crossed the ruin to the hedge. At the meadow edge, the barrow ruts deepened, turned, and met the cart as expected. The watcher stepped forward this time, impatience showing. Harrington raised a hand, and 4 shapes closed the lane from both ends with quiet speed. Enough, he said. The 3 froze. Headman at the cheek-piece, rearman at the tailboard, watcher with empty hands. He held them there without fuss and took Evans' breathless message from the church. 2 men peeled off by the yews toward the quarry path. Chain carried. Haul Pritchard. Quarry, Harrington said. Briggs, secure cart and horse, then sit on Pike's Gate. To the 3. You'll be where I left you when I return. He cut across fields to the pits. A bolt slid inside a door. He set his palm to the wood, lifted the latch, and eased it open. A hooded lamp showed a small circle, scarfed youth over a bound man on the floor. No more, Harrington said. Hall's stave took the knife hand. Pritchard cut the cords. Richard's jaw was bruised. His eyes were steady. They meant to move me inland, he managed. They didn't, Harrington said. Up you get. They brought Richard by hedges to avoid the square. At Pike's Yard, Briggs had the horse stabled, the cart inside, and the tarpaulin back off crates that did not smell of apples. The watcher's hat was off. His nerve had gone to ground. Harrington didn't deliver speeches. Hold them, he told Briggs. At dawn, names. He faced Tony and Sally. You counted. That kept the timing true. Morning work began at once. In the inn's back room, Harrington laid the blue shade, chain, canvas frame, phosphorus bottle, wheel rim with hob's notch, tar-stiff tarp corner, broken shackle, and Richard's scratched stud in a neat row. The haunting is a lamp, a chain, a screen, and a story. The trade moves by water to a ruin people avoid, then by barrow to a cart, then by road. When Pike tried the usual denials, apples, a hired cart, don't ask what's in a box, Harrington only said, you'll answer for carriage and concealment. Talk now, and your winter shortens. Sally supplied the clean chalk mark she had logged from the Louvre. Harrington matched it to the sign on a crate in the vault. A field tally, he said. Not a sailor's, likely Baines's orchard mark. By then the trap's work was done, river route mapped, cart seized, quarry door opened, captive freed. The evening would bring formal charges, but the mask was already off. The haunted hall had been a warehouse by rumour, lit blue from a slit to comfort a boatman and misled a village. Tonight had given them the chain, the wheels, the chalk, and the hands behind them. Chapter 6. Trick or Trap. By nightfall Harrington had his post set. He made short notes in his notebook. Evans, Church Louvre, tally only. Briggs and Pritchard, Reeds at the river bend. Hall, Mill Lane, 2 borrowed men. Hedge at the lower meadow. Tom, lamps and messages at the inn. Tony and Sally went with Mr. Elliot to the bell chamber. You see and you count, Evans said. No signals. From the Louvre they logged what mattered. Barrows rattled past the churchyard, 2 ordinary, 1 too smooth, iron rims whispering. On its tailboard, a neat chalk triangle with a stroke. The barrow did not stop at any stall. It turned into Pike's Lane and vanished. Down at the hall, Harrington gave 1 measured pulse with the blue shade, then went to the vault. The river answered. Boat at the sally port, men up the steps, crate to barrow, barrow to table, no talk. practiced sequence. Harrington let it run, slipped the broken lock back into the grille to look undisturbed, and moved out. At the lower meadow hedge he watched the transfer. Barrow to cart, horse with a white star, headman at the cheek-piece, a rear man at the tailboard, a fourth watching and not lifting. He let the first run past to learn timing and route, then reset at the tower for the late attempt. From the church, Tony and Sally saw the cart return lighter. Evans marked it. Near 11, a small disturbance at the churchyard wall. A masked man with a turned-out right foot, and a second man carrying chain cut away toward the quarry track. Sally recorded 2 to pits, chain. A runner took the card. Below, Harrington gave a second brief pulse from the slit. The boat came again. The drill ran faster, the barrow wheels bit deeper. At the meadow hedge, the watcher stepped in to help, impatience breaking the pattern. Harrington raised a hand. From both ends of the lane his men closed, quiet and fast. "Enough," he said. Hands released the tailboard. 3 men froze where they stood. Evans arrived at a run. 2 from the church to the quarry, 1 with chain. "Haul Pritchard, quarry," Harrington ordered. "Briggs, take these 3 and the horse to Pike's yard. Hold them." Tony and Sally left the tower and met Harrington at the field edge. They followed the shortest lines. Hedge gap, garden backs, ditch lip above the pits. A bolt slid inside a door. Harrington set a palm to it, felt movement, lifted the latch and eased it open. Inside, a hooded lamp made a small circle. A scarfed youth bent over a bound man. Chain lay coiled by the jamb. Harrington stepped in. "No more!" Hall's stave took the knife hand. Pritchard cut the cords. Richard's jaw was bruised, eyes steady. "2 brought me," he managed. "Cart waiting." "They won't move you," Harrington said. He shut the door, shot the bolt, and set Hall to fetch a shutter. Field edge home, no square. They walked Richard between them by the hedges. At Pike's gate, Briggs had already stabled the horse, rolled the cart in, and pulled the tarpaulin back from crates that were not apples. The watcher stood empty-handed, done with pretending he was only a lookout. Harrington put the blue shade on the cart plank for a moment, then pocketed it. The theatre's finished. Home, statements, at dawn, names. The back room of the Red Hart was ready before sunrise. A long table, door open. Harrington laid out the pieces in a straight line. Blue shade, greased chain and peg. Chalk-scored canvas frame. Bottle with phosphorus skin. Narrow iron wheel with the smith's notch. Tar-stiff tarp corner. Broken shackle from the grill, and Richard's scratched shirt stud. "This is your haunting," he said. Lamp, chain, screen, and a story. Trade came by water to a ruin people avoided. Barrows took it to the meadow. Carts carried it out. Last night we took the cart at the hedge, the boatman's shore routine at the vault, and a prisoner they meant to move. He questioned only what counted. Hob the smith pointed out his notch on the iron rim. Evans from the Louvre confirmed cart timings and the Wexley turn. Sally identified the same chalk sign she'd seen on a crate in the vault, a triangle struck through, also chalked cleanly on a barrow by the churchyard. "A field tally," Harrington said. "Not a sailor's." Pike tried the stock answers. Apples, hired carts, no questions asked. Harrington didn't argue. "Carriage and concealment," he said. "Talk now and shorten your winter." As for the quarry, Hall described the bolt, the chain, the knife, the release. Richard's stud on the table removed any doubt about where he'd been. Harrington kept the crowd focused. Ghosts didn't move these crates. Men did, and they hid behind a tale you repeated for them. The blue light was a signal for a boatman. The chain was a noise machine. The rest relied on your fear of the path to the river. He didn't name every name in that room. That work would follow, but the shape of the ring was clear. A carrier's yard that received at odd hours, a watcher who didn't lift, a boatman who landed twice on cue, and hands willing to use an ice pit as a holding room. He turned to Tony and Sally. "Your counts kept the timing true. That made the closes clean." Outside, the village stirred toward an ordinary morning. Inside, the props of the haunting lay harmless on the table. Harrington tapped the blue shade once with a fingertip. "Tonight," he said, This goes back in a box. So does the story. Chapter 7. The Secret Unmasked. By morning the back room of the Red Hart was a plain courtroom. Harrington kept the door open and set his evidence in a single line on the table. The blue glass shade, a greased chain and peg, a chalk-scored canvas frame, a bottle ringed with phosphorus, a tar-stiff corner of tarpaulin, a narrow iron wheel rim, the broken shackle from the vault's grille, and Richard's scratched shirt stud. He let the room see before he spoke. "This," he said, lifting the blue shade, "is your ghost." He tapped the chain. "This made the dragging." He touched the canvas. "This made the figure at the slit." Then, without flourish, "Blackthorn Hall has been a warehouse under a rumour. Boat to Sally Port, barrow to vault, barrow to meadow, cart to road. The story kept your feet away from the path that mattered. 3 men were taken at the lower meadow last night," he went on. "A second party tried to move Mr. Middleton by land and met a door that opened the wrong way. The boat escaped into fog, but not unseen." Eyes turned to Hall's prisoner, the scarfed youth from the quarry. He stared at the floor. Harrington didn't dwell on him. "Mr. Hobb," he said. The smith came forward. Harrington turned the iron rim so the light caught a tiny notch at the weld. Hobb nodded. "Mine, batch last week, narrow set, carrier's lad paid." "For whom?" "Pike," Hobb said. "Said a grocer needed small barrows." "Thank you." "Mr. Elliot," Harrington said next. The vicar described what he and Evans had seen from the Louvre. A cart into Pike's gate near 10. 3 men, cart out again at past. Later, a second return, lighter. "If you'd told me yesterday about blue lamps and canvases," he admitted, "I'd have laughed." He turned to the carrier. "Mr. Pike, you'll answer for carriage and concealment." Pike's shoulders came up. "I run a yard. I don't ask what's in a box if it's paid for." "Wheels are wheels." Harrington held up the tarred scrap. The ghost of a chalk mark lingered in pitch. A triangle with a stroke. Miss Middleton saw the same mark on a crate in the vault and on a barrow by the churchyard. Not a sailor's tally. A field mark. A murmur named Baines before Harrington did. Mr. Baines, orchard owner, donor, deacon, pushed to the front, colour high. "My pickers chalk everything," he said. "If some fool boy—" "Your pit-house door wears fresh chain scars," Harrington said evenly. "The floor shows a tailboard twice this week. In Pike's ledger," he laid a narrow book on the table, "you pay for apples on nights when the river runs calm, but you don't pay pickers for bins you say were filled. In Pike's shed we found a second blue shade in a crate lid marked with your grocer's tally. The mark on this tarpaulin matches the one on your field bins." Baines's mouth tightened. For a moment calculation showed through indignation. "If," he said carefully, "I had lent space, whom did I harm? You'll not find a boat. You'll answer for theft from bond, excise evasion, and unlawful imprisonment," Harrington replied, "and you'll name the men upriver who supply you and the dealers on the Wexley Road who receive your crates." Baines moved toward the door. Briggs and Pritchard stepped in silently and took his arms. Harrington nodded to Hall. The scarfed youth was brought forward. Harrington didn't badger him. He made the path plain. "Speak and shorten your winter." The youth swallowed. Words came in awkward bursts. Baines set him by the churchyard to listen and fetch chain. Pike's yard took the loads. 2 western shopkeepers, dry goods by day, paid in early carts. The watcher in the lane answered to Baines. The boatman slept upriver in a net shed off the reeds beyond Western Bridge. He supplied the minor timings, the 2-note whistle, the blue once for in, twice for go, that locked to what Harrington already had. Harrington closed Pike's ledger with his palm. "You see," he said to the room, "how a story did your fearing for you. Nobody asked why a blue light would burn at a ruined slit, or why chains would sing on nights with no wind. You kept children away and left a road clear." He turned for the first time that morning to Tony, Sally, and Richard. "You 3 did what was needed. A chalk cross on a stone, a count from a tower, a man bound who kept still. He picked up the scratched stud and set it down again. Small things keep the time of the large. Formalities followed, names written, charges stated, men taken on the western road, a constable sent for the boatman. When the last signature was taken, the inspector stepped aside. At the doorway he paused with Tony and Sally. "You noticed what most people teach themselves to ignore," he said. "Oil on a glove, the width of a wheel, a clean chalk line where it shouldn't be. Keep doing that." "It was your plan," Sally said. "It was everybody's work," Harrington replied. "The vicar's view." Tom's messages. Mrs. Middleton's light left in the window, so a runner could find a door. He inclined his head to Richard. "And good sense under pressure. Men live or die by that." Richard's voice was rough but steady. "I did very little." "You did not worsen your odds," Harrington said. "You'd be surprised how rare that is." They stepped into the square. The village, already walking toward its usual errands, did not linger to be ashamed. Harrington did not parade the prisoners. He sent them by the back lanes, with their heads down and papers in pockets that would not lose them. His men moved off to search Baines's sheds and Pike's yard for the missing names. The work would go on through the day. He wasted no words pretending otherwise. "What will happen to the hall?" Sally asked. "Nothing for a while," Harrington said. "Then it will be scavenged for stone again, or fenced. Better it stand as a ruin than as a story." Richard looked toward the crest where the broken tower showed above hedges. "I'd prefer it as a lesson." "It will be that," Harrington said. Richard's aunt had bread and tea ready, because that is what she did in every crisis. Harrington, already turning to go, declined with a nod that admitted he would take a cup later, unasked. "I'll see you before you leave the village." "There will be thanks. Accept them and say nothing immodest." He had gone 2 steps when he turned back to Sally. "Keep your little map. Drawn in a hurry maps are honest. If ever you think you want the yard, write to Inspector Harold Price. Clear eyes are rare." When he was gone, the 3 friends sat at the kitchen table and let ordinary sounds, cups, chairs, the front latch, put the night behind them. They spoke sparingly. There were still statements to initial and a visit to make to the church to return Mr. Elliott's pencil. But the work that mattered was already done. Richard broke bread and looked over it at them. "Shall we ever have a quiet holiday?" Tony shook his head once. "Not if there's a ruin within walking distance." "Then next time," Sally said, "we'll choose a town with nothing older than a post office." They meant to rest, but there is always one more task. Harrington sent word an hour later. The boatman had been found at the net shed, boots still wet, sleeve marked with blue. The western shopkeepers were being walked to the magistrate. Pike, now talkative, had begun naming names before the charge sheet was finished. Baines, once he understood the weight of unlawful imprisonment, had asked for paper and a chair. Men who love ledgers sometimes save themselves with them. By noon the last carts were searched. 2 crates held tobacco in paper. 1 held brandy. 1, tellingly, was empty. Proof that last night's early run had fed a buyer who preferred to keep his shop shelves thin by day. Harrington wrote to the excise, summarised his night's watch in 3 paragraphs, and sent a runner with copies. "What will people say of Baines?" Sally asked. "What people always say," Richard said, "that they suspected something and can't remember why." "Let them," Tony said. "We remember the chalk and the wheels and the rest." They did not linger. The noon train would keep its own time whether they were ready or not. Back at the house, Harrington caught them at the gate with the briefest of farewells and a handwritten note to show at any yard office if needed. Sally folded her hurried map and slid it into her case. "Tools obey the hands that hold them," she said. "So do stories." "Then next time," Richard said, "let's pick up better ones.